everyone. Welcome to our Lord's Day Holy Reading time. We're glad you could be here, and we're
be here on redeeming the time first and doing that from the love of God and for His glory. We have actually arrived at chapter 6, and it's kind of snuck up on me even, but this is the last chapter of the first part of the book, redeeming the time. It's 5:16, for the days are evil. We'll probably be in this for at least another month or month and a half. But the second half of the book, I haven't said this for a while, we plan on doing, Lord willing, considering our latter end, which is actually longer. It's about 80 pages. This has been about 50. So we got quite a bit left to go through and learn from. Chapter 6 is titled Directions for Redeeming Time. Just a quick review. We've had when is time to be redeemed, how time must be redeemed, why time must be redeemed, motives to redeem time, and now directions for redeeming time. So it's gone quickly, but here we are. Directions for redeeming time. And we have some commentary today from several people. John Fox starts with, now if you are resolved to put this duty into practice through the help of heaven, speedily and diligently observe these directions. He has 5 of them. Number 1, take heed and beware of those things which rob you of your time. 2, labor to convince yourselves of the worth of time accordingly. 3, set apart a considerable portion of time for the most secret duties. 4, cast up and compute your time, and I've got a little bit of comment on that for myself and looking into it. And 5, maintain a holy fear on your heart of coming to the end of time before your work is done. I don't think I'd seen compute used by any Puritans before in a book. I looked up Webster's 1828, and it's interesting that the Latin actually means to lop or prune, and the definition at the top says to think, count, reckon, to cast up. So he says cast up and compute your time. So the cast up, and Webster says the sense is probably to cast or throw together. And secondly, to cast or estimate in the mind, to estimate the amount by known or supposed data, and to calculate. My overall impression I wrote down of what he's trying to get at by saying cast up and compute your time is to, after musing on it for a while, to take an overall long-term look at how much time, maybe probably in days, at the most you might have in your life, just arithmetic, Lord willing, the rest of your life, and realize no matter how much that is, what that number might be, short. So that's kind of what he's getting at, I think, is to put it all in perspective by looking at how many years you've lived, how much time you might have the Lord grant you a lifespan, etc. It really, if you look at it in days, it really can hit you in a certain way. You know, there's only a few thousand days left, or the life that we live, no matter how you look at it, is very short. So today there's 6 directions. He says direction, well, excuse me, he quickly goes over the 6 of them. Take heed of those things which rob you of your time. Now the thieves that will rob you of this exceedingly rich jewel are these 6, against which watch for your life. Vain thoughts, worldly cares, unnecessary visits, unprofitable discourse, excessively indulging the outward man, and unlawful or immoderate recreations. Today, Lord willing, we will look at the first two, vain thoughts and worldly cares. And under this direction, number one, there are, again, 6 points, and we will do vain thoughts and worldly cares. The other 3 are, again, unprofitable discourse, excessively indulging the outward man, unlawful and immoderate recreations, and the like, unprofitable discourse. So John Fox starts off with vain thoughts. These are secret and subtle thieves that insensibly rob us of our time every day and in every duty. Vain, impertinent, and wicked thoughts, like Pharaoh's frogs, creep and crowd in on us and thrust out good thoughts so that we cannot keep our mind steady and composed. And I think we all probably realize that our mind is always filled with something, and the enemy of our soul will, in a myriad of ways, or our own flesh will seek to implant memory. Your own computer in your head will constantly be running, and we must take heed of what is coming into our head at all times, because we're all real good, I think, at vain thoughts. That doesn't mean just vanity. I mean just wasteful time, wasteful thoughts, and the like. Again, says, like Pharaoh's frogs, creep and crowd in on us and thrust out good thoughts so that we cannot keep our mind steady and composed. Solomon says, quote, the eyes of a fool are in the ends of the earth. And Fox notes Proverbs 17:24, where that's from. The whole thing is wisdom is before him that hath understanding, but the eyes of a fool are in the ends of the earth. And I looked up fool in Webster's 1828. Kind of felt led to do that. It lists 4 things, four types: a stupid fellow, a dullard, a simpleton, arrogant one. To me, the dullard, the simpleton, and the arrogant one were pretty self-explanatory. But I looked up the word stupid, because I think the stupid fellow is I know that's not, that's not intimating that somebody's necessarily not intelligent. It's interesting that stupid comes from stupor, or stupid, which comes from stop, the word stop. And so if you look at that in that way, the fool whose eyes are in the ends of the earth, he's roving constantly. The world is his passion, and are in the ends of the earth, constantly roving the earth, has been rendered insensible. He's been stupefied, and he has been stopped from even considering spiritual thoughts of the Lord. Now, if you're talking especially of a professor who's relapsed into something like that, he's rendered incapable until rescued, rendered incapable of focusing on the Lord in the same way that he's doing on the earth. Fox continues, so are our thoughts, as the eyes of a fool are in the ends of the earth, gadding, wandering up and down, here and there and everywhere. These evil thoughts spring and rise from within us as naturally as sparks from the fire. Out of the heart proceed evil thoughts, Genesis, he notes Genesis 6:5, and God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And Matthew 15, verse 19, for out of the heart proceed evil thoughts, murders, adulteries, fornications, thefts, false witness, blasphemies. And they follow us continually in every place and in every service as the birds on Abraham's sacrifice, which Abraham did drive away. And to backtrack a little, got to talking there myself, and I forgot about some commentary from John Trapp. Haven't looked at anything from him recently, but this is very good regarding, again, Proverbs 17:24. Wisdom is before him that hath understanding, but the eyes of a fool are in the ends of the earth. Trapp says, wisdom is before him that hath understanding. The face of an understanding man is wisdom. His very face speaks him wise. The government of his eyes, especially, is an argument of his gravity. His eyes are in his head. He cites Ecclesiastes 2:4. I couldn't really put the two together looking at that verse particularly, but I got somewhere where it intimated that what he's trying to get at is he's not spending time in trifling things. Or another comment from somebody else I saw regarding that was look forthright upon the mark without idle or curious prying, which he elaborates here. He says, he scattereth away all evil with them. Proverbs 20, verse 8. A king that sitteth in the throne of judgment scattereth away all evil with his eyes. Proverbs 20, verse 8. He hath oculum irritortum, which is Latin for your eyes are contained in a net, as so to say. Again, you look forthright upon the mark with the rendition or the what that means in English. Look forthright upon the mark without idle or curious prying, as Job had. Job 31:1, I made a covenant with mine eyes. Why then should I think upon a maid? And Joseph had oculum in metum, or metum, M-E-T-A-M, which means your eye is on the goal. His eye fixed upon the mark. He looks right on. Proverbs 4, verse 25, let thine eyes look right on, and let thine eyelids look straight before thee. He goes through the world, someone that fits this description. He goes through the world as one in a deep muse, or as one in haste of some special business, his Christian life, his Christian walk, and therefore overlooks everything besides it. I underlined that. That really impressed me when I first read it. He hath learned out of Isaiah, verse 33, 14 and 15, that he who shall see God to his comfort, and I'll read that real quick. Isaiah, I had that, Isaiah 33. We'll put the comment in context here. Isaiah 33, 13 through 16. Hear ye that are far off what I have done, and ye that are near acknowledge my might. The sinners in Zion are afraid. Fearfulness hath surprised the hypocrites. Who among us shall dwell with devouring fire? Who among us shall dwell with everlasting burnings? He that walketh righteously and speaketh uprightly. He that despiseth the gain of oppressions, that shaketh his hands from holding of bribes, and stoppeth his ears from hearing of blood, and shutteth his eyes from seeing evil. He shall dwell on high. His place of defense shall be the munitions of rocks. Bread shall be given him. His waters shall be sure. So he says that he who shall see God to his comfort, John Trapp says, must not only, quote, shake taking gifts, as in the former verse, but also stop his ears from hearing of blood and shut his eyes from seeing of evil. And he has another Latin phrase here, vitus nobis in animum per oculos est via, says Quintilian, which trying to translate that, the best I could get was what I just mentioned caused defects in the mind. That's the best I could, closest I could come to that Latin statement there. So B, sin entereth into the little world through these windows, our eyes, and death by sin, as fools find too oft by casting their eyes into the corners of the earth, suffering them to rove at random without restraint, by irregular glancing and inordinate gazing. In Hebrew, the same word signifies both an eye and a fountain. To show, saith one, that from the eye, as from a fountain, flows both sin and misery. Shut up, therefore, the 5 windows, that the house may be full of light, as the Arabian proverb hath it. We read of one that making a journey to Rome, and knowing it to be a corrupt place and a corrupter of others, entered the city with eyes closed shut. Neither would he see anything there but St. Peter's Church, which he had a great mind to go visit. Alypius and Augustine, being importuned to go to those bloody spectacles of the gladiatory combats, resolved to wink, or what he means is to shut his eyes, and did. But hearing an outcry of applause, he was there, looked abroad, and was so taken with the sport that he became an ordinary frequenter of those cruel meetings. So I thought that was very good insights there from John Trapp. And let's see. All right. So again, Fox says, and they follow us continually in every place, the evil thoughts, and in every service, as the bird of Abraham's sacrifice, which Abraham did drive away. They must not lodge. Jeremiah 4:14, O Jerusalem, wash thine heart from wickedness, that thou mayest be saved. How long shall thy vain thoughts lodge within? That Abraham was driving away, tried to lodge themselves there on his sacrifice. Though we cannot hinder the fowls from flying in the air or over our heads, we may hinder them from pitching on our heads. Holy David had vain thoughts, but hated them. Psalm 119, verse 113, I hate vain thoughts, but thy law do I love. There is not a minute, but many thoughts pass from us, as in a minute sands do in an hourglass. Psalm 94, verse 19, in the multitude of thy thoughts, of my thoughts within me, thy comforts delight my soul. In the multitude of my thoughts within me, thy comforts delight my soul. Interesting to look into this verse. I discovered somebody named Sir Edward Ley. He was not a Puritan per se, but he was in that era. He was part of the Westminster Assembly. He was an Oxford student of divinity, law, and history, and he has written commentary on some scripture, including Psalms, and he was a close follower of a William Whately, W-H-A-T-E-L-Y, who was a Puritan preacher and author. And looking at Psalm 94:9, on this one he said, in the multitude of my thoughts within me, which means confusion of thoughts, was within him, whether to stick to God or to leave him. My careful, troubled thoughts, perplexed as the branches of a tree, for so the word properly signifieth. Therefore the Greek turneth it sorrows, as in Psalms 139, verse 43. Thy comforts, not efficiently, but objectively, the consideration of what thou art to me, delight my soul and revive it, keep it from sinking. So he's talking about disquieting thoughts. And have the saint who's going through this, having him focus on the big picture versus individual compartmentalized troubles, where you focus on God's, the comforts of God versus whatever you're going through, whatever affliction, whatever torment. This verse is pointing you towards the Lord and the big picture of God's comforts. Another word that was associated with that in Strong's was cogitation, ambivalence, division, divided opinion, your thoughts confused in you, and ultimately you have consolation and compassion from God's comforts if you get back focused on that. Christians, consider how much of that time is lost when you spend, which you spend in holy duties by vain thoughts. Consider how much of that time is lost which you spend in holy duties by vain thoughts. When we should draw near to God, our hearts by our thoughts steal away, and there are but a few awakened tender spirits, truly sensible of this intrinsical secret evil, though much of a Christian's duty and the very inwards of religion lies in observing the thoughts and in watching the heart. Therefore, above all, keep your heart. Proverbs 4, verse 23, keep thy heart with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life. And take heed of your spirit. Malachi 2, 25 and 26. Now we come to worldly cares. These are great wasters of our precious time. The most of the world do mind earthly things. He cites Philippians 3:19, which we've seen so many times, that even in heavenly mindedness, because they mind earthly things. And I will read that portion quickly here, because it encapsulates 17, 18, and 19. 17, brethren, be followers together of me, and mark them which walk so as ye have us for an ensample. For many walk, of whom I have told you often, and now tell you even weeping, that they are the enemies of the cross of Christ, whose end is destruction. So verse 19, whose God is their belly, and whose glory is in their shame, who mind earthly things. So we've looked into this many times, and it occurred to me that after looking at some commentary, and especially John Gill, that there are two aspects here. You have believers who can fall back into minding earthly things. And he talks in 17, brethren following us as an ensample. And Gill points out something, following good godly people as an ensample, as how Paul is talking about here. And then, of course, the what he calls in verse 2 of chapter 3, dogs, evil workers, or false professors or teachers. You have outright evil involved with the enemy, with those who mind earthly things, and or insidious distractions. If it's just a believer, a professor of Christ, who's distracted to the point with earthly things that it constantly wastes their time, it constantly takes away from their devotion to the Lord. And just quickly, Gill has a short one, and he kind of encapsulates those three verses. John Gill, as ye have us for an ensample, or type, says Gill, believers should be ensamples one to another, beyond whether they're a minister or not, or preacher. But he says, especially ministers of the word. Pastors of churches are not to be lords over God's heritage, but to be ensamples to the flock. 1 Peter 5:3, in word, in conversation, in charity, in spirit, in faith, in purity, as the apostle exhorts Timothy in 1 Timothy 4:12. These things, they are to be followed by believers. But there was further commentary that we can follow the high example of other believers too. So John Fox says, men's hearts, heads, and thoughts are so intent about the things that perish that they do hardly entertain a serious thought of God and eternity all the day. God is not in all their thoughts. They that are after the flesh do mind the things of the flesh. Romans 8, verse 5. The whole thing is, for they that are after the flesh do mind the things of the flesh, but they that are after the Spirit, the things of the Spirit. And I looked up the word mind in Webster's. It was interesting. So to look at that, for they that are after the flesh do mind the things of the flesh. Mind, in more detail, means to entertain or have a sentiment or opinion, by implication to be mentally disposed, or earnestly in a certain direction, intensively to interest oneself in with concern or obedience, set the affection on, be like, be of one, be of the same, regard, savor, think. And then down below, to be of the same mind, i.e. agreed together, cherish the same views, be harmonious. So all these things, they that are after the flesh do mind the things of the flesh. To be of the same mind, agreed together, cherish the same views, to direct one's mind to a thing, to seek, to strive for, to seek one's interest or advantage. So there's heavy dedication to minding the things of the flesh. So we can all, if we put that same look at the word mind to minding the things of the Spirit, that's what we want to do to that degree. Fox continues, and not only the children of this world, but professors themselves are so eager in pursuit of this poor earth that almost all their time and strength is spent about it. And while men are so careful and solicitous about many things, and in a very crowd and hurry of business, it is impossible for them, when they're in that mode, it is impossible for them to redeem time for God and their souls. And that speaks to our time, 2019-20, more than ever. As soon as their eyes are open, the things of the world stand as so many suitors to invite and draw them. Some have their hearts so overcharged and surfeited with cares and fears of this evil world that their abundance will not suffer them to sleep. Ecclesiastes 5, verse 12. The page there. The sleep of a laboring man is sweet, whether he eat little or much, but the abundance of the rich will not suffer him to sleep. I think we know that's greatly true. Luke 21:4, he cites, now when it is thus, opportunities are lost, souls are neglected, holy duties omitted, or they are very unsuccessful. He cites Matthew 13, verse 22. He also that received seed among the thorns is he that heareth the word, and the care of this world and the deceitfulness of riches choke the word, and he becomes fruitful. So again, that's the world recruiting and stealing from a prospective follower of Christ, who, if he goes that way, they were not of the elect, but it's their choice. The deceitfulness of riches, the cares of this world overcome. And like Felix, the moment when the iron is hot is passed by. I've got a reading here from Matthew Henry on Matthew 13:22. He says, the thorny ground, some fell among thorns, which are a good guard, the thorns, to the corn when they are in the hedge, but a bad inmate when they are in the field. And the thorns sprung up, which intimates that they did not appear when the corn was, but afterwards they proved choking to it. Matthew 13, verse 7. This went further than the former, for it had root, and it represents the condition of those who do not quite cast off their profession, and yet come short of any saving benefit by it. The good they gain by the word, being insensibly overcome and overborne by the things of the world. Prosperity destroys the word in the heart as much as persecution does, and more dangerously, because the stones spoil the root, the thorns spoil the fruit. Matthew Henry says, now what are these choking thorns? First, the cares of this world. Again, care for another world would quicken the springing of this seed, but care for this world chokes it. Worldly cares are fitly compared to thorns, for they end with sin and are a fruit of the curse. They are good in their place to stop a gap, but a man must be well armed that deals much in them. 2 Samuel 23:6 and 23:7. They are entangling, vexing, scratching, and their end is to be burned. Hebrews 6, verse 8. These thorns choke the good seed. Note, worldly cares are great hindrances to our profiting by the word of God and our proficiency in religion. They eat up that vigor of soul, which should be spent in divine things. They divert us from duty, distract us in duty, and do us most mischief of all afterwards, quenching the sparks of good affections and bursting the cords of good resolutions. Those who are careful and cumbered about many things commonly neglect the one thing needful. Secondly, the deceitfulness of riches. Those who have raised estates, and so the danger that arises from care seems to be over. They're deceived. And they continue hearers of the word, yet are still in a snare. Jeremiah 5, verse 4 and 5:5. It is hard for them to enter into the kingdom of heaven. They are apt to promise themselves that in riches which is not in them. I had to read that a couple times. He's talking about they are apt to promise themselves from the riches they have the things which are not in riches, like peace and contentment and spiritual riches. So again, they are apt to promise themselves that in riches, which is not in them, to rely upon them, and to take an inordinate complacency in them. And this chokes the word as much. So they haven't done anything wrong in raising an estate, but they're placing every hope and belief in those things. And so it takes an inordinate complacency in them, and this chokes the word as much as care did. Observe, it is not so much riches as the deceitfulness of riches that does the mischief. Now they cannot be said to be deceitful to us unless we put our confidence in them and raise our expectations from them. And then it is that they choke the good seed. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
So, finally, one sentence. Therefore, take heed of the world, so great a devourer devourer of time. And we'll finish and go back to Psalm 94:19, which we already covered, but I have another one from Alexander Maclaren here. It's very short. Read that again. Close today. Again, in the multitude of my thoughts within me, thy comforts delight my soul when you're in agitation. In multitude of agitated thoughts, basically. So we'll cover that again here with Alexander Maclaren and close today. He says, the singer is closer to his own experience in the next strophe, which is a division of music or poetry in Psalm 94:16 through 19, in which he claims his share in these general sources of rest and patience, and thankfully thinks of past times when he found that they yielded him streams in the desert, when he finally got to that point where he was focusing back on that. He looks out upon the multitude of evildoers and for a moment asks the question which faithless sense is ever suggesting and pronouncing unanswerable, quote, where shall I find a champion, unquote. As long as our eyes range along the level of earth, they see none such. But the earth should turn our gaze to the occupied throne. There sits the answer, capital A, to our almost despairing question raised by these agitated thoughts. Rather, there he stands, capital H, as the proto-martyr saw him, capital H, risen to his, capital again, feet in swift readiness to help his servant. Experience confirms the hope of Jehovah's aid in us, our experience. For unless in the past he had been the singer's help, he could not have lived till this hour. The singer would not be there. He must have gone down into the silent land. No man who still draws breath is without tokens of God's sufficient care and ever-present help. The mystery of continued life is a witness for God. That's true. And not only does the past thus proclaim where a man's help is, but devout reflection on it will bring to light many times when doubts and tremors were disappointed. Conscious of our own weakness, appeals to confirming strength. If we feel our foot giving and fling up our hands towards him, he will grasp them and steady us in the most slippery places. Therefore, when divided thoughts, for so the picturesque word employed in Psalms 94:19 means, divided, agitated, troubled. Therefore, when divided thoughts hesitate between hope and fear, God's consolations steal into agitated minds, and there is great calm. So may we look at that and remember that with hope and redeem the time for the Lord's glory and from our hearts. And Lord willing, we will continue on next week in taking heed of those things which rob us of our time.
Thank the Lord. All right, everyone on the line. It was nice to have you with us, and you're welcome to join us every Lord's Day if you want.
Yeah.
Until then, go redeeming the time, and Lord willing, we will talk to you soon.